Some things happen without explanation. Some experiences haunt people for a lifetime. This is where I tell those mysteries. And remember, not everything can be explained. Story. My past came back to haunt me. I never thought I'd be telling this story since. For a long time, there seemed to be no end to this situation. However, after some recent developments with my mental well-being, I am finally able to provide the world with this information I have been keeping to myself for nearly 3 years out of fear. For some context, my life has been hectic since I was a child. My older siblings are a set of twins. 1 boy and 1 girl. And my 2 younger siblings were adopted from abusive and otherwise traumatizing households. That meant that, for as long as I could remember, I was otherwise neglected by my parents since they spent all of their time with my other siblings. Jaden and Juliana, my older siblings, were always in some sort of fight which could only be solved by my parents either talking to them or making things even between them depending on the context. And then with my younger siblings, my parents spent the other half of their time making sure Cameron and Xavier felt safe, loved, and supported in our household, and reassured them that no matter what, their biological parents would never regain custody of either of them. That all meant that I was responsible for my clothing, my meals, my hygiene, and all my necessities from the moment I was able to be independent. So, since I had no other option, I taught myself how to ride a bike and protect myself so that I could get to and from school or friends' houses or wherever I was going. As I got older and older, it started to feel like I was just some stranger in a family's house. No photos of me on the wall. No accomplishments of mine being displayed for all to see. None of my items strewn about the house. You get my point. Hell, my bedroom was even in the attic. Kind of like in Home Alone. It got so bad that my friends even pointed it out whenever they would come over. My best friend, Stephanie, commented on how my parents didn't even greet me when I get home. Wish me good luck on days when I had tests. Requested I stay safe whenever I went out. The gist is obvious by now. I was basically a ghost in a house I would call my own. As a way to get their attention, I would dip my toes in rebellion and do illegal things. I started wearing shorter and shorter clothing to expose risque parts of my body. I started smoking either joints or vapes with some stoners around my high school. And I committed petty theft and got arrested for Class C misdemeanor on a couple occasions. And, yet, my parents only paid me any mind when they had to get me off thanks to connections they had. This got me angry. The fact that they were so far up my siblings' asses that they couldn't even see the issues going with me pushed me to do something that would change my life. I did something I would regret until the day I die. After some, admittedly, short decision-making, I packed a small bag full of my more scandalous clothing my boyfriend at the time had gotten me in. Along with said boyfriend and a couple friends, I headed off on a trip to the next state over. Our idea was that us moving to a new state would allow us to make some Pornhub videos as a way to make money and say a big "screw you" to our parents. As teenagers, the idea was the best one we could come up with. But, I'm pretty sure I don't have to tell you this because the horror movie, X, is surrounded by this concept. So, why am I talking about this then? Well, because the events that followed my eventual departure from this type of work have scared me. After about 4 years of doing this, I was a 22-year-old female with a job that was frowned upon and side-eyed whenever I mentioned it to people. I was someone who, after having sex with one too many people over the years, decided that they wanted to change and sharpen their life back up. So, after my birthday came and passed, I had finalized my choice of leaving my past and reshaping my life back to the smart young woman I had always wanted to become. And, after a long and tiring fight with my ex-boyfriend and people I used to call my friends, I packed my shit and left our house faster than any of them expected. I was finally freed from my past. Or, I thought that, anyhow. About 2 years after I started fixing up my life, I was sitting in the classroom and listening to my college professor lecture us on law and the different degrees of different crimes. Hence the Class C misdemeanor line from earlier. After a rather lengthy discussion on whether manslaughter or murder was worse, my professor mentioned that he sent us all a link to some study method he had conjured up via email before closing the meeting up. Mr. P, short for Mr. Professor, a fake name, noted that we had about 4 minutes left of class and told us to all go and see if we could open up the website he sent us. So, following his directions, I quickly opened up my email and started looking through the recent messages I had gotten. When I had done this, I saw an email from an unknown Gmail account that just said, Tatum Badeau, which immediately sent chills down my back. That was what I considered my old name. When I ran away to do that Pornhub job, me and the people I was with all decided to change our names legally. I hated having any sort of connection to my family since they never really acted like one. So I had decided to go from Tatum Badeau to Tatum Quinn. That meant every legal document that I had written stated my last name as being Quinn, since that is what I wanted it to be. But now, I was faced with someone who was either a family member reaching out or someone who knew the old me. Either way, I was hesitant to open the message since I wanted no contact with anyone from my hometown. However, I knew I couldn't just leave it alone, so I eventually read what the sender had to say. The email read as follows. Tatum Badeau, that was such a pretty name you had, connecting you to your French roots that in itself was connected to historians of great power. Blanche Monnier was an ancestor of yours, and yet, you jumped at the opportunity to no longer associate yourself with the people you once called mother, father, and brothers and sister. Why is that? Is it because they showed you no attention, no affection, no nurture? Or was it because of something horrible you had done? Was it because you did something so vile that you felt like you could no longer live in Cheshire? Who knows? Well, except someone does know. You and me. I was there that night, watching in the shadows as you committed a crime you never got punished or convicted for. Instead, you got to walk free because no witnesses or evidence. But, what would happen if I went to the police and tell them that I someone you have no personal connection to? Saw what truly went down that night. The statute of limitations aren't going to end for another, well, lifetime. Nevertheless, I will give you some time to think about whether you will come to your morals and turn yourself in, or if you will leave it to me to come clean. Make your choice. Tatum. After reading the email, I was paralyzed in my seat. All I could ask myself was what exactly this person was talking about. What crime did I commit by myself that I got away with that someone knew about? The answer? None, because all the crimes I had committed were done in broad daylight, and each of my crimes had been done with friends. That's when I was hit with a realization. This person must have the wrong person. Despite the coincidence of someone also being named Tatum Badeau who lived in Cheshire being too close to be real. Regardless, I sent the person a quick email explaining that they may have the wrong person. If only I realized how bad this whole emailing situation would become. I would have deleted the email and would play no mind if I got another. When I had replied to their email that day, that sent off a chain reaction where every week at the exact same time on the same day of the week, I would get emails from the unrecognizable Gmail account slowly revealing details about the crime I supposedly committed or just taunted me up and down for their own enjoyment. This whole thing lasted about 6 months before the emails just stopped. Like randomly one day, I had checked my inbox at the time the messages usually came in and there was nothing. No new details. No burgeoning information. Just nothing. For the next week, I would constantly check my email and every day, it would never be full of the messages I had gotten used to getting. To fill up that space, I would read through one of the old emails again and write down one details every day. This is how the list looked by the time I was done. 1. The crime happened at night. 2. It was a crime without a statute of limitations. 3. It was a murder. 4. The perpetrator was with a companion that night. 5. The murder weapon used was a hatchet that had been stolen from the local fire department. 6. The hatchet was never found after the fact. 7. The teen who died that night was a local girl named Sophia who was widely hated by other teenagers in town. 8. The unknown sender was the only witness to the murder. 9. Sophia's body was moved from the scene and hasn't been seen since. And 10. My family were still blissfully unaware of my absence. I didn't need some anonymous person telling me to understand that no one I once loved gave a flying duck about me no longer living with them. In spite of that tidbit and my own personal opinions on my family, I decided to check on their Facebook accounts just to see if the messenger was telling the truth. What if they were advocating for me to come home safe? What if they were having discussions about me in hopes I would see it and have a change in heart? In the moment I felt stupid asking these questions to myself and getting that excited feeling. But I still searched their profiles up. My mom's was the first one to catch my attention. So that was the first one I clicked on. I quickly took notice to the newest post of hers, celebrating different accomplishments from her children. I read through her caption. I read through the list swiftly. My older siblings were both 27. One married and pregnant with their first child and one engaged. And my younger siblings who were 18 and 17 respectively, with them both either graduating high school or being elected student council president. I admit, I had a good smile when reading through the various different triumphs until I reached the bottom. There it read, "And Tatum, my beautiful Angle who has opened our eyes over the years and taught us how to be better parental figures." What was she talking about? I hadn't rolled back into Cheshire since I left, let alone had any contact with my family. No messages, no letters, no phone calls, no form of contact in any capacity. And I hadn't noticed it before. But when I scrolled back up to the picture, I noticed something. There in the middle of all my siblings was someone who looked identical to me. The same long, straight brunette hair with highlights. The same piercing blue eyes I had. The same piercings I had gotten over the years. The same tattoo on the right arm. Everything. Whoever was in this photo was me somehow. I didn't even have to try and rationalize this situation because there was no explanation. Someone out there took my identity, my looks, my tattoo, my story. Someone out there knew my body adjustments to a T and got them on their body to add some consistency. That way, if I ever went to Cheshire, my parents wouldn't know there was a difference between me and the unknown doppelganger. My first thought was that whoever sent me the emails was the one who became me. That would explain their aggression towards the idea of me changing my last name despite who it is connected to and why they wanted to pin a crime they committed on me. The reason they were the only witness is because they were the one to murder that girl. If they even murdered her at all. Then I had a rather eerie thought. What if that girl that was supposedly murdered, Sophia, was the face behind the interpreter and the person who had sent me all those messages? Sure, the prospect was crazy, but just stay with me for a second. I had gone to the police's website for my hometown and had looked up Sophia, last name, with nothing coming up. No missing report or murder report. I had searched the internet for any articles for the girl with. Again, no results. And the number the emailer had given to me in case my email wasn't working one day was a 631 number which came from a town close to Cheshire. Either way, I knew I needed to go back home and check everything out for myself. Unfortunately, I won't be able to fit it all in this post since Reddit has a character limit. However, I promise to update everyone with the end of this story soon. Thank you to anyone who has read it all and will stick around for the rest of the story. I worked on death row. And this was the case that ended my career. In the old days, those in my profession wore a mask. Some say that it's so no one comes for revenge. Others say that it was so God doesn't recognize it as a sin. Still, I have heard that it is so death doesn't come for the wrong killer. Long gone are the days of axes. And it has been almost 50 years since even France used a guillotine. Instead, in my home state, we prefer the electric chair. And I am the hand that pulls the lever. A modern-day executioner. What they don't often report on killing criminals is the toll that is inflicted on those who sentenced them. The lawyers, the judge, the jury, and none more so than those who pull the lever. There's the guilt for some executioners, the toiling abyss, and the uncertainty which plagued cases that weren't cut and dry. And even the most die-hard amongst us never know when something will trigger our subconscious. My colleague, Eddie Croquette, who pulled the big one over a mother who killed her 2 sons. She claimed they were demons, because she only prayed for daughters. Had it happened to him, pulling the lever on someone like that normally didn't keep any of us awake. But it was what the woman said while she was sitting there screaming as 100,000 jolts lit her nervous system up like a Christmas tree. That got Eddie. It smells like cheeseburgers, he told me, before her body went limp. She said that, and sure, you know, there's a little smoke, but I thought that was that. Until a couple days later, Jane and the kids come home with some McDonald's. And I was fine when I ate a fry. Even had a bit of their milkshake. But when I started unwrapping one of the cheeseburgers, I suddenly smelled it, of that woman cooking. It crawled out of some cavity in my brain, and came out of my nose. I could even taste her in my mouth. He shakes his head. I haven't been able to touch the stuff since. Then there are the conferences. It started as a kind of support group. And after Leslie McNeil passed away, it kind of grew from there. Those who knew Leslie said she wasn't the same after bringing it down on this Satanist that had been convicted in the tri-state area. She had chosen Eddie as her alternate, who later confirmed that it was true, that a Satanist did indeed curse Leslie as he was dying. But it was after the fact. That caused the majority of the outrage from our community. When Leslie went to stop the juice, the electricity jumped and the amps became unstable. See, there's a safety feature on the newer models. A light that warns the executioner if the leads are hot, meaning that the system's been overcharged and has caused the lever to be live. But most states still got them rinky-dink ones built in the late 1800s. Without any of the fail-safes. Leslie's machine was one of those. And so we originally gathered to levy our grievances after her accident. To get those in charge to make a much-needed change. But most of our pushback came in the form of threats. That they'd tear the entire program down and switch to lethal injections. Put us all out of work. So we kept our mouths shut publicly. In want of a $3.29 Part 1 see often at hardware stores. The lack of that part sent Leslie to the hospital, putting her into a coma for 6 weeks. They also had to amputate her arm because of it. From the elbow down. And I personally think that what she said after waking up is why people believe she had been cursed. It was Eddie and then committee leader Joe Jones who heard it from her own lips. I can still feel it. She screamed, "Oh God, Joe, it's so scared." "What is?" Joe demanded. My hand. My hand." Leslie shouted. "It keeps signing from the other side. H-E-L-L. Quote. Wild theories after that one got out. A lot of at-home accidents from fanatic groups. As electricity use in occults started to resurge. And I try to stay away from the mysticism of it myself. EVPs, photographs, energy. But it's difficult not to have some sort of obsession with volts and amps. Or Tesla coils while in this field. For instance, when electric cars were commercialized, I embraced them. Watches, books on my tablet. It seems like such an odd thing to say for someone in such an archaic profession. But it is true. That was until it happened to me. What became the most important case of my career turned into one of pure terror. But I suppose I can't properly tell that story. Not really. Not without telling the last moments of Jennifer Tooley, as this story and hers intertwine. Although, I don't know where the truth begins and the lies end. What I do know is that Jennifer Tooley was a budding journalist on this side of the Sierra Nevada. An all-valley kind of girl. Beautiful, young, and full of potential. And on the night she was murdered, she was covering an event for work. Her text messages didn't indicate anything out of the ordinary. Gossip, complaining about her dress, her boss, how much she enjoyed the food, and what she hated. Later in the night, she even sent her brother a photo of the cute guy she had just met at the bar. A photo that would turn out to be the only clear image of her killer prior to his apprehension. And I mean this when I say, it's as if before that photo was taken of him, the man never even existed. He's in none of the public records. And as of this writing, no one has come forth to identify him or claim him as kin. Jennifer Tooley's body would be found 4 days later in a nearby cabin. After her brother reported her missing, she was found along with all of her belongings. Among them was a napkin where she had written, "Tonight I met a man." Though he claimed to be something more. But isn't that what they all say? There was also a video that was uncovered from her phone, which was erroneously leaked to the public, causing quite the stir. In the video, it showed Jennifer Tooley swimming for her life. She's screaming a sound my heart will never forget, splashing, as she struggles to breathe after every stroke, far away from shore. And it's worth noting that Tooley was an excellent swimmer at the collegiate level, and had won multiple competitions. But that night, none of it seemed to matter, as shots pan to the shore where the man can be seen standing next to the cabin. Back to her out deep in the water. Back to the man who begins walking on top of the water towards her. She turns again, screaming, swimming, and looks back several times before the audio starts to hear the footsteps on the water getting closer and closer, until he's standing next to her, crouches, and says, "Do not be afraid." The video cuts out, and it's radio silence from the department. I feel as if that made it worse. The rumors that followed. It started with a few frat boys said they recognized the wanted man at one of their parties. They couldn't provide any proof. And after some digging, it seemed they were trying to ruin the name of a rival football team. But even after the truth was revealed, it didn't matter. The damage had been done. Next thing I know, there's sightings of the man at this ice cream parlor here, or a restaurant there. Locals even began reporting someone screaming Jennifer Tooley's name past sunset. Headless goats, UFOs, the swamp ape, and even red candles found in the shape of a fallen star deep inside the woods were subsequently linked back to the killer. So that by the time the man was finally captured and came to trial, everything was up in the air. No one could get a good grasp of the situation. For every 5 people who called the man for what he was, a stone-cold killer, there were hardcore zeitgeists who would claim that this man, the murderer, was the next coming, some even claiming that the man was actually Jesus. The trial finally quelled most of that noise, as evidence that hadn't been leaked was finally released to the public. And the entire picture of what he did to that poor girl, holding her under the water, dragging her back to shore, the way he chopped her up, hanging her on hooks in that old cabin, the look of life still in her eyes as he made her smile for the camera, finally started to clear. The state didn't know what to do with him. They were afraid. And when someone suggested the man be sent to the electric chair, I knew that my time was coming. And in October, that call came. I had been eating well, getting a lot of sleep, really trying my best to stay in a good headspace before the execution. Although the day of, not a single thing went according to plan. Usually the families and guests are brought into the room first, then the officials, the priest, and the executioner. So there's limited interaction between us and the condemned, in order to lessen any psychological impacts. But this wasn't the case. Somehow the duties got mixed up, and the priest was running late. I was left in the holding hall with the murderer, alone. "Do you know what my last meal was?" he asked. "Bread and water." He chuckled. "Of course, when I drank it. Was it still water?" I tried to ignore him. "Say, it was kind of like the day they caught me. I was drinking wine." "Shut up." I wrapped the wheelchair they had strapped him to. "But they said it wasn't wine." The reports say it was blood. He laughed as if he could hear inside of my head. Go on. Ask it. He leaned in real close. I could see his teeth. Why did I leave all of that evidence behind? He laughed again as he answered his own question. So that they would know it was me. By the time everything was sorted out, all the people and paperwork, it was already an hour past noon. We were running late, and I was afraid the entire thing would be postponed, as if it were an act of God somehow. But I knew that if I were called to service again, that I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to stand the man a second time. So when we were all mostly gathered, I pushed forward before anyone could get in a word. In less than 15 minutes, we had him strapped up and the machine was primed. The phone was still on the hook and all last rites were said. The prisoner had opted out of any last words, and I was given the nod to send justice straight through his brain down to his soul. I pulled the lever. His body contorted and snapped, shivering. His mouth opened. I could see inside it. A gasping hole that was blacker than night, as blue and white lightning came in flashes. And for once, I didn't let my hand off the lever. Not until this monster's hair stood on end. When it was done, a few people clapped. But it was Eddie, whom I noticed first. He was looking straight at me, his eyes wide and telling. For he knew better than most what I had done, and exactly how I was feeling. How a killer only seemed to spread his madness from one person to the next. Even in the end, before anyone could move, the man opened his eyes and smiled. No one knew what to do. What the fuck happened? The chief yelled at me. Was it primed correctly? I could barely nod. Eddie agreed. I checked it myself. What should we do? Someone asked. One of the men in the plastic seats got up angrily. From the papers I knew him to be Jennifer Tooley's brother. He rushed forward, as two officers detained him to the floor. The man in the electric chair only laughed. The red phone suddenly rang, and everyone grew quiet, except for the man. The chief answered the phone on the third ring. I could see him shaking his head, and then after a brief exchange he turned to me and said, "Do it again." I pulled down the lever and this time I stepped back and watched. It went on for a whole 5 minutes before I turned it off. Everyone was silent this time, never taking our eyes off the burnt body. The chief somehow goaded Eddie in approaching the electric chair. He crept closer. I could see him smelling the air. See the shiver that ran down his spine as he comes face to face with the man in the chair. In an instant, blood spurted everywhere. Eddie fell backwards howling, clutching his face, as the man, the murderer, was grinning from ear to ear with a piece of Eddie's skin in his mouth. I could hear a few people screaming. Some were hurriedly trying to leave. I stood there in shock as I didn't know what to do. And after nearly an hour of commotion, the coroner was forcibly coerced into writing down a time of death as no pulse could be found. Although the body kept twitching. Eventually, the guards removed the man without a name and strapped him back into the wheelchair. And as long as I live, I'll swear that even as the door was swinging shut behind him, I could still hear that man laughing. Story. I listen to a true crime podcast about myself. Every night on my walk home from work, I listen to true crime podcasts. Even though my favorite podcast already released their episode for this week. The app said there was a new one. Excited, I hit play. It was a small town, the kind that still has mom and pop shops lining the street. The kind where everyone knows your name. But little did the residents know that they would soon be rocked by a horrible crime. I stopped at a traffic light. The red glowed in the darkness, glinting off the wet street. A black SUV sloshed by. Across from me, eerie blue refrigerator lights glowed from inside a corner deli. The chairs all up on their tables, feet in the air. The signal turned to waft. That chilly September evening was no different for the young student. She'd left her shift at the local store and walked back home, except she never made it home. Young student, local store. Damn, this was hitting close to home. I was a part-time student at Franklin Community College, and worked at the local convenience store. And, of course, I was walking home. I glanced behind me, looking at the alleyway behind Alessandro's Pizza, which was dark except for the neon light spilling from the sign. Her boyfriend reported her missing the next day. The town conducted a volunteer-led search, and after 2 days, they found something. Dread formed in my stomach, anticipating a body. But what he said next was so much worse. Washed up on the shore of Worthington Lake, they found a pair of size 9 red Converse sneakers. I stopped and looked down at my red Converse sneakers, damp from the rain. What the hell? My heart began to pound. The shoes were sent to a forensic analyst, who would compare its wear pattern to another pair of her shoes to try and determine if they belonged to the victim. A rumbling sound made me jump. I turned to see a dark SUV turning left at the intersection. Didn't I see that car a few minutes ago? Maybe it's following me. And the car passed me and disappeared into the darkness. Come on, Sarah, get a grip. Converse are popular sneakers, a little out of fashion. But still, 9 is a common women's shoe size. And what college student doesn't have some sort of a job? What, you think you're listening to some sort of prophecy of your own death? Yeah, right. After a few weeks, the results came back. The analyst was certain. The shoes belonged to none other than Sarah Campbell. The blood drained from my face. Sarah Campbell. My name. What the fuck? How? I didn't have time to think. I forced myself to move. I broke into a run. The small shops turned into a colorful blur. Searching the lake came up empty. Without a body. A crime is hard to solve. But police didn't give up. And finally, a witness came forward. Someone had seen a car parked at the lake that night. Around 2 a.m., a black SUV with darkened windows. No. What the hell is going on? I whipped around. The street was empty. No people, no cars, no witnesses, said the little voice in the back of my mind. The one that's watched way too many true crime shows. My eyes scanned the shops. All closed. There were 6 black SUVs matching the witness's description in the Franklin area. But one of them, in particular, caught Detective Nolan's eye. It belonged to John Kelly, a registered sex offender. The sound was so soft I almost didn't hear it over the voice of the podcast. I whipped around, and there it was. 2 blaring white headlights behind me, coming from a black SUV. I forced my legs to pump faster. The car didn't speed up, it crawled along, slowly, taking its time, like the driver knew he could catch me. No matter what, I glanced back, trying to make him out behind the darkened windshield, but the headlights were too bright to see anything. Kelly wasn't just a registered sex offender. He'd been convicted of assaulting a woman he worked with who had multiple piercings and short dark hair. Just like Sarah, the car crawled down the road, stalking me, like a lioness stalks her prey. I veered left, onto our dark residential street. Just a few more steps. Headlights flashed across me, illuminating my running shadow on the pavement. I didn't look back, I just ran, as fast as I possibly could. The little brown house with the yellow shutters came into view. I sprinted across the grass, grabbing my keys from my pocket. Click. I threw the door open and slammed it shut behind me. Then I turned the deadbolt, collapsed against the door, and began crying. I heard the rush of the car passing our house, continuing down the road, but I wasn't safe. Gabe wasn't home yet. I was alone, in a dark house, with someone driving down the street who knew exactly where I lived. Still sobbing, I checked all the locks. Then I called Gabe, who assured me he was 5 minutes away. I made my way down the dark hallway and headed into the bathroom. Then I set my phone on the counter, grabbed a clump of tissues, and began to blow my nose. Click. I jumped, whipped around, but it wasn't coming from outside the door. My phone's screen lit up, the podcast was still playing. I must have hit it when I put the phone down. It had skipped several minutes forward. According to the play indicator. What do you think happened to Sarah? The baritone voice asked. I reached for it, to turn it off. Well, she'd told me she wanted to run away before. I stopped dead. It was Gabe's voice, clear as day, coming from the speakers. She did? Why? The voice asked. She wasn't happy with her grades, her job, her parents. She told me sometimes she'd dream of just moving to some random state and leaving it all behind. I froze, staring at the mirror. I never said that, never. Gabe was lying? I mean, that was hurtful to me as her boyfriend. You know, I thought we were going to get married someday. But apparently she didn't feel the same way. My heart pounded in my ears. So you think she just skipped town, and is happily living her life out somewhere else, rather than being abducted or murdered? A pause. Yes, that's exactly what I think. That's all for now. Thank you to our listeners. The outro played. I stared at my reflection. Everything coming down all at once. My mind trying to race and catch up with what it meant. The front door creaked open. Footsteps sounded outside. Sarah, I'm back. I backed away from the door. Sarah? My eyes fell on the window. I ran over to it. Turned the lock. Push, I popped the screen out. Then I swung a leg over, pulled myself through the window, and ran as fast as I could. Story. I visited a psychic in New Orleans. She gave me terrible news about my future. Have you ever felt an overwhelming sense of apathy toward everything? There was a point when I had a good career, an amazing partner, and financial security. I have always had a background noise of carelessness toward existence. My inability to be present became overwhelming. My wife, Rita, often thought of my disposition as emotional unavailability. Still, she understood my persistent melancholic mood lent itself to such a state. She rarely held it against me. Rita had a remedy to it all. She was the first to present the idea of us going on vacation to New Orleans. She wanted us to see the Jazz Museum, the St. Louis Cathedral, and Jackson Square. I was less than enthused about a plane flight to see monuments we could look at in documentaries. She managed to soften my narrow-minded cynicism one day. She reminded me that Sazerac cocktails would be available everywhere there. An excuse to do nothing but drink for a week straight made the trip seem much more worthwhile. Asterisk. We stayed at a place called the Trident Inn. We had our fill of seafood within the first hour of landing. We visited the French Quarter, and I was far more smitten with the place than I could have ever anticipated. The pure freedom in those streets is palpable. I want to go back to the hotel, Rita said as she tugged on my jacket. I gave her cash for a cab and told her how I saw a few lined up 3 streets back. You can't be serious, she said. Let's go together now. I'm cooped up all day in my job. This is the first time in a while I have the chance to get some fresh air and see new sights. Let me enjoy it. I'll be back in the room in an hour. I want to hit up a few more bars. She agreed with reluctance and walked away following the directions I had given her. I wandered down leaf-strewn streets lined with Creole and Greek Revival-style buildings. I found a small entrance at the bottom of a flight of stone steps in an alleyway. The threshold was luminescent. I entered it. A small crowd of people holding highball glasses commiserated. They looked at me with a bit of apprehension. A stranger in their domain. The interior had the scent of pumpkin candle wax. The place looked like a 1920s speakeasy. Advertisements on the counters were of vintage products. Pictures on the wall were of the swing era. The telephones in the corners were gold-laden and had a mechanical dial. I sat down. A bow-tied and mustached bartender greeted me. I ordered an old-fashioned whiskey. I looked around between sips and saw a booth that stood out amongst the others. A neon sign which said "Psychic" in bold letters faced me. I decided to pay for what I presumed was a theatrical parlor trick. I got comfortable in a chair across from her. I had never done this before, but the liquor made me feel a little loose. How much for a reading? She gave me an estimate of $50. I left my bills on the table and she took them. The act of divination she performed next took me by surprise. She pulled out a piece of what I realized was animal bone. She brought out a small oil bowl and lit its surface on fire. The staff and patrons acted nonplussed despite my terror. What would you like to know about your imminent future? Is my real estate business going to boom within the next half year? I asked. She retrieved the bone with a long pair of pliers. As she took it out, she gazed at it for 30 seconds. Your business is going to fail because you are to die within the next 2 months. She said, I don't know how, but that is the time frame given by the spirits. Asterisk. I tried to tell myself that the woman was more than likely a con artist. A smoke and mirrors touring road magician. Rita and I walked through Louis Armstrong Park. We got to Congo Square when she decided to comment on a change she had noticed in me. You seem on edge, she said. We're on vacation. You shouldn't be so uptight. What's bothering you? I did not want to tell her how my interaction with the clairvoyant last night had unsettled me. I was never the type to believe in the paranormal anyways. I knew Rita would have been in disbelief that I had even put myself in that mystical situation. I'm fine. I lied. We were half a block away from our rental vehicle when I saw a man in a suit. He did not look like a vagabond or a homeless person due to his exquisite fashion. Still, his hair was greasy and unwashed, and his beard looked as though it had been growing out for a while. He stood next to a tree and stared at us like we were wildlife traipsing through his backyard. I caught him making eye contact with us. He picked up the pace and moved towards us. I immediately had the sense that something was off about him. A scar rested above his upper lip, the obvious byproduct of a bar brawl sometime in his past. I grabbed Rita's hand and we picked up a much more hurried movement. "You have an early ending," he said behind us. His tone was caustic. "A specter of death is following you. I can sense it. You need to listen to me. If you ignore it, it will be at your peril." I wanted to turn around and confront him on his random gibberish, or what I was trying to interpret as such. Deep down, I felt he was correct in his assessment. He was roughly the same size as me, so the fight would have been even in that regard. Yet I was not willing to take any risks as far as what he may have been concealing beneath his coat. I did not have anything on me that I could use to defend myself. We got to our car. I unlocked the doors. Rita stepped into the passenger side, and I got behind the wheel. The man had followed us all the way, and he was now 20 feet apart from where we sat in the vehicle. As I pulled out of the lot, I looked in the rearview mirror at the man. He started to sprint after us. I saw him reach to his waistband and pull out a blade. "Did you make any new enemies last night?" Rita asked. "Don't be ridiculous," I said. "I've never met him before." As I pulled out of the lot, I looked in the rearview mirror at the man. He sprinted after us. I saw him reach to his waistband and pull out a blade as I brought us to the highway and we escaped. Asterisk. While in bed that night at the hotel, she wrapped her arms around me and squeezed my body tight. "What happened today bothers me," she said. "Try not to worry about it," I said. We did the right thing in removing ourselves from the situation. If I had engaged him, he would have stabbed me or you or both of us. He seemed so confident in what he was saying, like he knew something we didn't. "That's what crazy people do," I said as I looked into her eyes. He would have said the sky is purple with equal conviction. "Don't let him rent space in your head. He's a random psycho." She never told me I had calmed her down, but her demeanor indicated that my pep talk worked. We both fell asleep in our embrace. Asterisk. We went to Lake Pontchartrain the next day. We stepped out of the car and took in the sights. We knew we had about a mile to walk before we could set up our picnic supplies. I stared at Rita as she grabbed the basket and blankets from our trunk. I took in the sight of her flowing dark hair and emerald eyes. It occurred to me at that moment how stunning she is. My anhedonia and the fast pace of life made me take her natural elegance for granted. A car sped towards us and hit her. It was a cream-colored Cadillac that came from behind where I stood. Its metal glinted in the sunlight as it revved into high gear and clipped Rita in the side. She managed to escape into our vehicle. She crawled into the fetal position and scrunched up tight enough to fit into the trunk. She released a scream. The Cadillac hit the main road again. I was full of anger, adrenaline, and terror. I did all I could think of at the moment, which in retrospect seems pathetic. I took off my shoes and threw them at the fleeing car. I looked at the driver's seat. It was the same man in the suit. Asterisk. The local police came out and took a report. They asked me if I had managed to catch the license plate, which I had not. They also told me there was no surveillance in the area since it was remote. Of course, there were also no witness testimonies. I gave them the best description of the individual I could. I hoped they would tell me they had a regular troublemaker matching the description. They give me a blank expression as they had no idea who I was talking about. The paramedics assessed Rita and found that she had a crushed foot. They took her to the hospital. They offered an ambulance ride, but I drove her after they gave me a map. All I could think about was finding the man and beating him into oblivion. Asterisk. We returned home with my wife's foot in a cast. I felt as though I had failed her as a man. My guilt overcame me, especially when I had to push her wheelchair. We were on the plane and in the air. I looked around at the other passengers to make sure the man in the suit was not sitting anywhere. When we got back to her house, she looked at me with sadness. "We should never go on vacation again," she said. I let her words hang in the air. I could not bring myself to disagree. Asterisk. I paid attention to the date of my prophesied death. Those numbers hung heavy around my neck. I always wondered how a free criminal must feel when he knows there is a warrant for his arrest. I always ruminated on how that must be an extreme way to live or feel. I held the notion that the outlaw had it easy compared to me. By then, I already had resigned myself to any potential destructive fate. Then the date passed. When I got home from the office, I looked everywhere online for the phone number of that speakeasy. I searched for different psychic services in New Orleans. I sought out pictures matching the semblance of the person I encountered. There was no one. I lied to my wife. I told her the company needed me to look at another property out of state and that I would be gone for 3 days. She did not question me, which made me feel worse. I went back to New Orleans. Once I landed, the first thing I did was go to a utility supply store and buy a couple of mace canisters. I wanted to be ready in case the man in the suit stopped me again. Asterisk. The psychic had a line of customers when I went to see her for the second time. I sat down across from her and gave her a little bit of time to try and recognize me. Once she did, I spoke. "I'm still alive. I knew you would be," she said. "I wanted you to feel the excitement and appreciate your life for once." Story. Today, I was fired for inappropriate touching. I lost my job today. I was terminated with cause. And without severance. Now I've got only my meager savings to live on. And a pile of student debt looming over me. How I wish those were the worst of my problems. But what am I thinking? You don't care about all that. You want to hear the salacious details of my crime, right? To be the next to pass judgment on the creep. Well, indulge me a few minutes. I'm getting there. What you need to know about me, first, is that I was raised old-fashioned, I guess you'd say. I left a lot of that behind in college, though, and even more when I moved to the city for work. Some of it stuck. I still, sir, and ma'am, people I don't know. I hold open doors for women. Help people carry things when they look overloaded. And stand up when an elderly person comes in the room. It wasn't some big point of principle for me. It's just how I was raised. And it never occurred to me that it was worth making the effort to break the habit. I wasn't hurting anybody, right? I never got any complaints about it. Lisa, for example, she was one my coworkers never seemed to be offended. When I'd open a door for her, she'd actually give me a little smile, which I'd return. Angela. Though, in retrospect, I think Angela was always leery of me. When I did the same things around her. Maybe I should have noticed. But why would I be looking for animosity in response to being polite? I'm rambling. Now. Sorry. I'll get down to it. It started last Tuesday. In the stairwell, Angela was carrying a stack of empty binders down to the supply room, not heavy. Obviously, but very awkward to lug around. I could see the tower of folders was wobbling precariously. Hi, I greeted her, with a half smile, taking half step towards her and extending a hand. Can I help you with duh? No, she snapped, twisting sharply away from me. I've got it. I was startled. Okay, I replied, my brow furrowed. I'm sorry. She didn't reply. She just shouldered right past me. I guess she must have stepped wrong and lost her balance. In the process, time seemed to slow down as she started to topple backwards, windmilling her arms, the precarious pile of binders tumbling through the air as she fell. On pure reflex, I snatched at one of her flailing arms and grabbed hold, arresting her fall with a jerk as I gripped the railing with my other hand. I got you, I grunted, as I held her forearm fast, relaxing my grip once she seemed to have gotten her legs under her again. As the sudden flash of adrenaline faded, I became aware of the feeling of her skin touching mine. It felt wrong. No, not wrong in the sense of culturally or morally forbidden. Wrong as in what the hell am I touching right now? Her skin felt cold, ice cold, and it was slick to the touch like some kind of rubber. Her eyes widened in shock as she looked down at where I held her arm. And my eyes followed hers, where I held onto her. My fingers seemed to pass through her flesh cleanly, as though the skin I saw wasn't really there at all. I didn't have time to process this before she jerked her arm away from me with surprising strength, and glared at me, her teeth clenched. I've got maybe 5 inches and 75 pounds on Angela, but that glare made me take a step back. Just then, the door to the landing above us opened, and we heard a group of people enter the stairwell from the next floor up, casually chatting with one another. She glanced over my shoulder and then scowled darkly at me again, before hastily gathering up her binders and continuing briskly down the stairs. Without another word, I just stood there, and I was still staring after her mutely as the group from above passed me, merrily going about their business as though everything was normal. After that, Angela avoided me, and I her, for the next week or so. But I couldn't get what had happened out of my head. Who, or what was I working with? I'd see her from a distance, across the office, and the more I saw her the more I noticed it. There was something subtly off in the way she moved, in the shape of the shadow she cast on things. If I looked at her hard enough, in just the right light, I'd swear I could see the faint outline of something else, just under the surface. One time, she caught me looking, and my heart stopped as she shot me that same withering glare she'd given me in the stairwell. That look had hate in it, hate so strong that it didn't seem human. She held my gaze, and I found I couldn't stand that glare. Not for long. I left my desk, and then I left work early. I went home and locked all my doors and windows, for the first time since my dad bought it for me a few Christmases ago. I loaded the hunting rifle I kept in a locked case in my closet, and leaned it carefully against the wall next to my bed. I didn't know exactly why or of what, but I was viscerally terrified of the thing that hid behind the innocuous illusion of Angela. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well, and the next day I thought about calling in sick. I knew I couldn't call the police. I didn't know who you could call about something like this without getting locked up in a mental hospital. But I was also raised to face my problems head on, and not back away from them. And even deeper than my fear, I had a deep down need to understand what the hell was going on. When I arrived back at work, I had schooled myself to calm determination. I had vague plans of trying to document the weirdness surrounding Angela somehow. But more importantly, I felt ready to deal with the problem one way or another. I was not ready for the email on my workstation, informing me I had a mandatory meeting with the director of our. I was informed that there had been complaints about me from an anonymous source. That I had been leering at some of my female coworkers, and had potentially touched one of them in an unprofessional manner. I was allowed to declare my innocence, and I was assured that my version of events, which is given to our, obviously, did not include uncanny shadows or cold, alien skin, would be considered. But I could hear the lie in her words that spelled out the real truth. I was already convicted. And this was my first and only warning. I left the director's office outwardly calm, but inwardly fuming. Bizarre elements aside, I guess anyone faced with that kind of accusation would be, especially when it's not true. What can you do in a situation like that? Deny it vehemently. Protest your innocence. And they'll use your anger as proof of what a bad person you are. Don't protest, and they'll take your silence for assent. You try all your life to do the right thing, to be a good person, and someone can just take all that away from you with a lie. I passed through the break room, and I could feel eyes on me. Though HR proceedings are supposed to be confidential, it's a small office. Word gets around. I set my jaw, and resolved to cross the room without making eye contact with anyone. But then I spotted Lisa. She'd been one of my best friends at work. I smiled at her and began to raise a hand in greeting, but this time she didn't smile back. When she saw me, she frowned and looked away. She looked disappointed. That hurt. I'd known Lisa the longest of anyone here. We'd even hung out outside of work a few times. I thought she knew me better. My heart was heavier than ever as I left the break room, trudging down the hall to the stairs, to return to my desk. I froze as I entered the stairwell. Angela was there, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression neutral. I carefully forced down my gut reaction to finding her here waiting for me. No confrontation. That would be what she'd want. I forced my face to a neutral expression, and made to move past her, resolutely refusing to make eye contact. As I passed her, I suddenly felt cold, slimy, digits close around my forearm. "Don't worry." An inhuman voice gurgled. "I got you." I was suddenly jerked back off my feet, and probably would have broken my neck falling down those stairs if my reflexes hadn't kicked in once again. I snagged Angela's arm with my other hand, and though my grip initially slipped down the cool, slippery length of her forearm, it stopped at the bony knob of her wrist and jerked her down with me, forcing her to grab the railing and catch us both, or else fall down the stairs herself. She gurgled and hissed in anger as I staggered back away from her onto the landing. I reached out towards the door, but my fingers barely brushed the handle before she lunged at me again. By this time, however, my adrenaline was surging, and I wove out of the way of the hands clawing for my throat. Then I threw my weight into her, driving her back against the opposite wall. I raised my forearm across her throat, pinning her against the concrete as she growled and squirmed. The unwholesome squelching sound her flesh made writhing against my hold turned my stomach. But I gritted my teeth and held on. "What the hell are you?" I asked through gritted teeth. She bared her teeth and turned that hateful glare on me again. And I twisted my head away from her, afraid she might try to bite into my face. Then, all of a sudden, her face was calm again, and she spoke in her normal, human voice. "Me? I'm just a poor, helpless woman," she said, sincerely, and then she screamed. Not the inhuman, gargling hiss of moments before, but the pain, terrified scream of an ordinary woman. A scream that, under any other circumstances, would have grabbed onto my heartstrings and sent me running towards it to offer help. Stunned and confused, I stepped back from her, looking around wildly. Before I realized what was happening, half a dozen of my coworkers had burst into the stairwell. I imagine you can guess what happened next. I don't care to relive it in detail. Long story short, security escorted me to my desk minutes later, and loomed over me as I was permitted a scant few moments to gather my things. The HR director told me in clipped, disgusted tones that I was lucky Angela had begged her not to call the police because she just wanted her trauma to be over. But that if I ever showed my face there again, she'd have me arrested in a heartbeat. She didn't have to bother, I wasn't ever planning on going back there. I've noticed some people are still staring at me when I walk by. Though, not because of what they think I did, of course. These aren't people I know, maybe not people at all. Suffice it to say, the HR director clearly wasn't the only one Angela told about me. And Angela clearly isn't the only one of her kind. Which is why I felt strangely reassured when I shook hands with the guy at the gun store today, after making my purchases, and felt nothing but a firm, honest grip. They say that humans started the custom of shaking hands in ancient times, as a gesture of friendship, simply to show that they were unarmed. Now, though, I'm not sure if that's the real reason behind it. Maybe our ancestors knew something we've forgotten. I still don't understand everything, but I know enough to take action. One thing I am sure of, though, I'm done being polite. Story. We've just discovered the most bizarre virus. Alright, long story short, my name is Cam and I'm a virologist. If you've never heard of that title, it's just a person who studies, researches viruses and any biological agents resembling them. It's a decent job, pays well and keeps me interested. I've never really thought about pursuing anything else. That was until last night. We've discovered something very bad. I was part of a 5-person team in a small lab situated up in the mountains of a Western European country. I'm not going to give too many specifics here. The project was spearheaded by a particularly exceptional microbiologist. Let's call him Hathaway. Now, Hathaway had been on vacation for a while in South America. Everybody who worked closely with him or knew him well thought this was incredibly strange. I mean, the guy never took a break. However, it all made sense when he came back. He looked like absolute shit. There were heavy bags under his eyes and scratches all over his face. He was jittery as all hell and could barely string together a coherent sentence. As we would learn later, he was never actually on vacation. I guess you could say that it was more like a business trip of sorts. Apparently, he'd been in contact with a colleague of his based in Chile. He'd been informing Hathaway about some peculiar events occurring in a small village near the coast. Something to do with a potential unknown disease. The specifics remained a mystery to us at the time. All Hathaway said was that it was worth looking into. What worried a lot of us were the cuts on his face and forearms. When asked about it, he simply claimed that he'd fallen down a few times while hiking. Without knowing what else to believe, we just bought it. Besides, the prospect of studying a new virus was incredibly intriguing. This might have been something big. We got to work right away. As the five of us, me, Hathaway, Jake, Beth and Colin, congregated in the main lab, Hathaway carried in what appeared to be a fortified glass tank containing a single bird. I think it was an Andean condor, native to Chile. I'll be honest, I was a bit worried at that point. We didn't even bother asking how he got it past border security. Tell me this isn't some derivative of the bird flu? Jake asked. No, Hathaway responded. I have no idea what it is. Actually, we all collectively raised our eyebrows at this. You see, it's definitely not airborne. You can also touch the bird as much as you like. Nothing will happen to you. It's transmitted some other way. That's when I noticed that the bird was actually blindfolded. I don't know why I hadn't earlier. Why nobody had even pointed it out. I guess my subconscious wasn't expecting such a bizarre sight. Don't tell me it has something to do with that, I asked, pointing to where its eyes should have been. Everybody else seemed to catch onto the strange detail. Hathaway stayed quiet for a second, staring at the ground before finally nodding. Are you kidding me? Jake inquired. How does that work? Wait, what the hell's even wrong with the bird? I found myself blurting out, although it was a fair question. Upon initial glance at it, nothing at all seemed to be off. The only somewhat strange thing was that it hadn't moved much. Hathaway sighed. Not at first, right? He dug around in his bag and pulled out another, smaller tank. It was filled with beetles. We'll do a demonstration here. He walked over to the bird tank and dumped all of the beetles in. Jesus Christ, I heard somebody mutter from behind me. Once Hathaway was finished, he turned back to us. His expression at the time was dead serious, in the gravest tone that I'd ever heard come from him. He spoke to us. I'm about to take the blindfold off of the bird. Whatever you do, don't look at it. In fact, just leave the room. I'll tell you when you can come back. I think that we all hesitated for just a second when he said that. What the hell was going on? Eventually, we all just did as we were told. We stood out in the hall in absolute silence for maybe about 3 minutes. At that time, I couldn't understand why it took so long for him to take a damn blindfold off. But then the noises started. I can't even find a way to describe them. They couldn't have come from a bird. That's for sure. Or at least, they shouldn't have. If anything, it was like a screech, except extremely deep and guttural. And also, somehow discombobulated. A few seconds later, we heard Hathaway screaming expletives. It sounded like he was in pain. We stood there frozen, not knowing at all what to do. Eventually, we were called back in. Hesitantly, I went first. As soon as I stepped in there, I saw Hathaway disinfecting his hand, which was now cut open. As he started wrapping it up, I turned my attention to the bird. It looked the same as it was before. The only difference was that it was covered in beetle guts. So were the glass walls of the tank. After we'd all settled down from the initial shock, Hathaway tried to explain what the hell had just happened. Here's what I think. Somehow, this virus is transferred upon direct eye contact with an infected specimen. What the fuck? Jake interjected. No fuck that. It makes absolutely no sense. You think I don't know that? Hathaway interrupted back. Just listen. Alright? Anyways, there aren't any immediate indications when something's been infected. They'll act exactly the same as they were before. At least at first. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when they start changing. I'd say maybe 3 hours. Tops. But once they do, you notice. The best thing you can do is to blindfold them. That way, you can't get infected, and the subject loses all of its symptoms. Well, I suppose that the best thing to do is to actually blind them, but I had to demonstrate first. Now we just have to figure out what the hell's actually going on. After that brief and albeit somewhat unsatisfying explanation, we went to work, but shit only kept getting stranger. After we'd blinded and killed the bird, Hathaway instructed us to start dissecting the brain. At first, we were tentative. After witnessing what had just happened, we were scared as hell of contracting whatever the hell it was that the bird had. Besides, we weren't even trained surgeons. However, Hathaway insisted that the only way this virus could be transmitted was by eye contact. As strange as this all was, we just went along with it. His reasoning for dissecting the brain first was that he'd made the assumption that this virus must be affecting the host on a mainly psychological basis. As it turns out, he was right. Once the brain was exposed, we noticed something truly inexplicable. Something was moving around in there. We all turned to Hathaway, hoping for further explanation. It's a parasite? Beth asked, looking mortified. Hathaway shook his head, looking incredibly confused. No, it shouldn't be. The bird's been alive for weeks after infection. I see no signs of physical deterioration. No nutrient deficiencies. None of that. We were all absolutely baffled at this point. What kind of fucking virus is large enough to be visible? We just stared at it, not knowing what to do. Then out of nowhere, the brain started bulging outwards. Hathaway's face dropped. It must know that the host is dead. It's trying to come out. Thinking quickly, I went and grabbed a nearby beaker. I managed to trap the thing just as it burrowed its way out. I really didn't know what the hell to expect at that point. But it didn't stop me from being completely surprised at the appearance of the thing. It looked absolutely alien. It nearly resembled a bacteriophage, except for the fact that it seemed to have tiny suction cups covering it. The head also appeared to be partially mechanical, with tubes protruding out and connecting to the legs. It was about the size of a black widow spider. I heard a cacophony of screams ring throughout the room, while Hathaway shouted at me to not let it out. As everything started settling down, we managed to transport it into another glass tank, this time smaller and more fortified. We spent the next 12 hours observing and analyzing it. The conclusion that we came to? It made no fucking sense. We couldn't classify it nor make sense of its various parts. Hell, the thing was too fucking huge to be any kind of pathogen. We would have written it off as some kind of undiscovered jungle creature. But the fact remained that it seemed to affect the behaviors of its host organisms. Eventually, we decided to just secure and leave it, planning to continue our research the next day, even though that was unlikely to yield any solid results. Most of us even considered just turning it over to the government. We sure as hell didn't know what to do with it. However, Hathaway declined that proposition. "We'll figure out what it is," he claimed, sounding somewhat unconfident. "This is big, all right? I'm not letting it go just yet." Tired as hell and not wanting to get into an argument, we all decided to head off to our separate temporary dorms in order to get some rest. What a big fucking mistake that was. We should have burned that thing right then and there. I remember lying in bed that night when a troubling thought creeped into my head. If the way that this virus was transmitted was by making eye contact with an infected organism, then wouldn't looking directly at the virus itself cause something similar to happen? How the hell would that even work? Did it replicate through our thoughts? Or did it need to control optical nerves in order to spread? How could that even make sense? But then again, none of this really did. However, I did recall Hathaway claiming that symptoms would surface 3 hours tops after the initial infection. It had been a hell of a lot longer than that. Being somewhat reassured, I passed out. I woke up about 4 hours later. I groggily rubbed my eyes, wondering what could have taken me out of my slumber. I'm usually a very deep sleeper. As I awoke back into reality, I heard it. Somebody was mumbling down the hall. It sounded like Jake. I got up and opened my door, planning to confront him. I stepped out and saw his silhouette, shrouded in darkness about 20 meters away. His back was turned to me, so I prepared to call out. That's when I felt somebody cover my mouth and pull me into an adjacent hallway. Reeling at the initial shock, I looked behind me and realized that it was Hathaway. I was about to shout at him once he let me go, but he motioned for me to be quiet. I also saw the desperation in his eyes. I stayed silent as he gestured me back towards the lab. I realized that we were fucked as soon as I saw what had happened. The reinforced glass tank where we had been holding the virus was empty. Whatever this thing was, it was out. "Don't look into his eyes," Hathaway told me, in reference to Jake. "We weren't careful enough. It must have infected him." "Did he open the fucking tank?" I asked him. He shook his head. No way. You need a password for it. It's not even written down anywhere. Only I know it." I looked back at the tank in abject confusion. There weren't any cracks on it or anything. There was no feasible way out. How the hell? I began to ask him, but he cut me off. "Look, I don't know. Maybe there's a lot more about this thing that we can't understand." He sighed, throwing his hands behind his head. My mind started racing. If this virus, or whatever it was, could have escaped at any time, then why didn't it make a move earlier? This thing must have been smarter than we'd anticipated. I guess it somehow knew that it had a better chance of escaping when nobody was monitoring it. But how did it escape? My thoughts were interrupted when we heard a knocking coming from outside the lab door. "Hello?" a voice called out. It was Colin. I got up to open the door, but Hathaway pulled me back down. What the hell? I barked at him. Let him in before he sees Jake. What if he already has? Hathaway responded. And then I thought about it. It takes around 3 hours for the symptoms to manifest. So even if he's been infected, he wouldn't know it yet. The hell are you guys doing in there? I can hear you. Let me in. Jake's being really fucking weird. It's actually kind of scary. Weird how? Hathaway asked. Well, he woke me up when he walked past my door. Actually, I think he was standing right outside. Yeah, he was mumbling something. I opened the door and asked him what the hell he was doing. It was dark, but I could tell that he was just staring at me. And then he started rambling. It was absolute nonsense. He was stringing words together, but none of it made any sense. After a while of him not responding to a word I said, I gave up and walked past him. That was like 5 minutes ago. Look, are you guys gonna come out or what? What are we supposed to do? Hathaway and I exchanged worried glances. If Jake really was infected, then so was Colin. We didn't move. For fuck's sake. What are you doing? Colin went on, sounding more agitated now. Is there a reason that you won't let me in? That was followed by silence. A few seconds later, we heard him mumbling something. Shit. Tell me that Jake wasn't infected. I guess our silence was enough of an answer. No fucking way. So what happens next? Hathaway. What the hell am I supposed to do then? Hathaway just sighed and shook his head. I don't know. I'm sorry. We heard him shout some more expletives before walking away. Fuming. We sat there for a while after that, having no idea what to do. Is there an emergency escape in here? I asked him. No, but it wouldn't matter anyways. We can't let those guys out of here. I've yet to see what effects it has on a human. But it can't be anything good. And don't even ask me about a cure. I don't know. So what are you saying? I asked him, dreading the answer. Best case scenario is that we blindfold and restrain them before they show any signs of aggression. He sighed, looking down at the ground before continuing. And then we hand them over to somebody else, somebody who can deal with this. We sure as hell can't. I know who he meant by that. I guess he just didn't want to admit it. Hathaway pulled out 2 rolls of duct tape as well as what appeared to be 2 tranquilizer guns. I didn't bother asking why he had them. Slowly and quietly, we opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The lights above were dimmed, so we could see, but not that well. I was terrified at this point. I kept thinking about that damn bird. I didn't see what it actually did, but the results spoke volumes. I did not want to witness how that translated over to humans. We walked down various corridors for about 5 minutes before we heard a soft voice to the hallway left of us. It was Jake. This is roughly what he was saying. In time? Where in time? It doesn't make sense? I know that it doesn't. So what do I do? I can't stay like this. Obviously, this made no sense. What was even weirder was his tone. It wasn't devoid of emotion. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He sounded genuinely confused and afraid, barely making any sound. Hathaway peeked past the corner, his vision aimed at the floor, presumably trying to avoid eye contact. However, as soon as he did this, he screamed and jumped backwards. I asked him what he'd seen, but he wouldn't turn to face me. A second later, I found out why. I saw him. I saw his face. When I peered over, he was lying on the floor, staring right at me. Fuck. I stumbled backwards, horrified at this sudden revelation. Don't worry, he told me. I'll take care of Jake, and then I'll take care of myself. Just go find Colin, and be more careful than I was. Without needing further conviction, I turned and ran the other way. As I did, I heard the sounds of a struggle and Hathaway screaming out in pain behind me. There was also laughter. For some reason, hysterical, deranged laughter. It sounded nothing like Jake. I ran across corridors, making sure to only look to the walls, so that I could just see in front of me from my peripherals. I nearly jumped out my skin when I heard somebody call out from behind me. It was Beth this time. I'd nearly forgotten about her in all the panic. However, I wasn't taking risks. I raised the tranquilizer pistol towards her general direction. "What's going on?" she asked, sounding terrified. I responded curtly and directly. "Have you looked into anybody's eyes since we left the lab?" She let out a near whimper. No. Why? Oh God, don't tell me." "Yeah, it's out," I told her, still aiming the weapon at her. "Fuck, well, I haven't made eye contact with Colin. All right? Now, I suppose that most people would have let up in this situation. She obviously wasn't infected, right? But there was something wrong with what she just said. Why did she mention Colin specifically? Why didn't she just say that he hadn't made eye contact with anybody? In addition to that, something about her tone was off. It was like a bad actor trying to deliver a line. I didn't know how to react, so I just froze there. Eventually, Beth started speaking again. "Is that a tranquilizer gun? Because that won't do anything." Before I could even react, she lunged at me. I closed my eyes as I felt her nails dig into my skin, and then into my face. She was trying to forcefully pry open my eyelids. Luckily, I had about 90 pounds on her, so I managed to throw her off of me. The whole time she was assaulting me, she was letting out some kind of extremely deep, throaty chuckle, as opposed to Jake's boisterous, hysterical one. Beth got back up in an instant and lunged at me again. This time, I managed to put her into a chokehold. However, she wouldn't go unconscious. I must have held her there for about 3 minutes. But her relentless scratching eventually made it a task too difficult. I pushed her away and started running. As I bolted out of there, I could hear her coming after me, still letting out that disturbing chuckle. The weirdest part was that I could also hear her palms hitting the floor. Was she fucking crawling? I didn't try and find out. I ducked into an adjacent lab and locked the door behind me. I heard her clawing at it from outside, so I just lied down of the floor for a while in order to catch my breath. God, she was still fucking laughing. What the hell was going on? Wait a minute, I thought. The laughing was too loud. It sounded like it was coming from in the room. Hesitantly, I checked the door. I nearly had a heart attack at what I saw. She was halfway through the damn door, but it was still closed. I could see her arms and face poking through the metal. Safe to say, I left immediately. Thankfully, there were 2 doors in the room, so I ran out into an adjacent hallway. I just wanted to get out of there. I started running frantically, trying to search for an exit, or a window, or anything. At that point, I was quite disoriented. I couldn't place where I was in the building. I still remembered to stay cautious. However, my heart nearly leapt out of my chest when I saw an illuminated exit sign. I followed it and was finally led to the door I entered through. However, Hathaway was blocking the entrance. He was hunched over, covering his eyes with his hands, and they were dripping blood. You know, I just feel weird right now. Not like myself. You now? I heard him utter out. I tried thinking about it. Had it been 3 hours since our encounter with Jake? Surely, it hadn't been. I guess he eventually heard me, because he shifted himself towards my direction. Cam, is that you? He spoke, in a soft but somewhat threatening tone. I don't know what happened. I tried killing Jake, but he just wouldn't die. I think it's coming now. I feel weird. What's happening to me? Can you tell me? Cam? Right after he said, a loud roar emanated from some corridor behind me. It was followed by what sounded like rapid crawling towards our direction. Don't worry about me, Cam. I always make it. Hathaway kept going. I always make it. I won't make it. He then fell to his knees, sobbing hysterically. I took the chance and bolted out the front door. As soon as I got out, I grabbed a bundle of nearby sticks and jammed the entrance. I'm pretty sure it won't last long, but it was the best I could do. I got into my car and sped down the mountain trail, back onto the highway. I got home about 30 minutes ago and I have no idea what to do. Should I call the police? Are they even going to listen to me? What about the FBI? Surely that's the best option here. I'll probably end up doing that soon. That virus cannot spread more than it already has. God, when I saw Beth's face coming through the metal door, I don't think I can ever forget that. And her eyes, they looked like something straight out of hell. Her pupils were replaced by what looked like this dark purple vortex. It was all so fucked up. Wait, I made eye contact with her. Didn't I? Shit. Story. I won the lottery. Now I'm trapped in eternal terror. I didn't believe it at first. The numbers rolled out on the screen, one after another, matching the ticket in my trembling hand. 9, 11, 25, 29, 35, 36, 45, 87. The Eterna jackpot. The impossible prize. I shouted in disbelief and threw my beer can against the wall. Foam exploded across the room. But I didn't care. I had won $50 billion. Enough to buy everything I ever dreamed of. I spent the night wide awake, shaking with adrenaline. Mansions, yachts, islands. I mentally bought them all. I even bookmarked a few listings online, just to make it feel real. My wife always said it was a waste of money, that nobody ever really wins. But somebody does win. Every few years, someone claims the prize. And this time, it was me. I memorized every step on the lottery's website for how to claim a jackpot. The process seemed simple. I rehearsed what I would say, how I'd react when they handed me the oversized check. The next morning, I walked into the Eterna Lottery headquarters, my heart pounding with excitement. The building was disappointingly plain: glass doors, white walls, a receptionist desk. No fanfare, no confetti. I approached the desk, still buzzing with pride. "I'm here to claim the jackpot," I said, holding out my ticket. The receptionist's eyes narrowed slightly. I noticed it immediately. Something in his expression changed. For a second, I thought he looked afraid. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "Follow me, please." I told myself he was just jealous. Maybe he didn't like seeing someone else's life change forever. He led me to a sleek office, where he asked me to wait. I paced nervously, already imagining the headlines. "Ordinary man wins $50 billion. My face on every front page. The door opened, and 4 men entered. 2 wore tailored suits. The other 2 were armed guards. I froze. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice cracking. One of the suited men stepped forward. His expression was blank, cold. "You won the Eterna jackpot, Mr. Fowler," he said. "And that's impossible." Before I could respond, the guards grabbed me. I shouted, thrashed, but they dragged me from the room as my vision blurred with panic. I woke up strapped to a hospital bed. Thick chains secured my wrists and ankles. Wires ran from my chest to machines beeping steadily beside me. "What the fuck is going on?" I screamed, yanking at the restraints. A man in a white coat stood at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand. His voice was cold and emotionless. "Mr. Fowler, you've been convicted of time manipulation. Your claim to have won the Eterna jackpot is undeniable proof." "Time manipulation?" I barked. "I don't even know what that means. I just bought a fucking ticket." He raised an eyebrow, as if he'd heard it all before. "The odds of winning the Eterna jackpot are 1 in 186 billion. It is mathematically impossible for any human to win by chance. Only a time traveler could have knowledge of the winning numbers." "Time traveler?" I stared at him, my mind spiraling. "We developed time travel technology in 1944. He continued, his voice steady. "By 1927, it was banned. The manipulation of time became a criminal act punishable by eternal banishment to the void." The void, a place outside time, outside space, endless nothingness. I shook my head violently. "You've got the wrong gun. I don't even know how time travel works. I'm just a fucking accountant." He didn't react. They never do. Moments later, I felt the prick of a needle in my arm. I thrashed, cursed, begged. Then the world went dark. At first, I thought I was dead. But death doesn't feel like this. I'm falling. I don't know how long I've been falling. Hours, days, centuries. There's no light, no ground, no sound except my own breathing. Ragged and desperate, I scream, but the sound is swallowed by the endless black. My mind is unraveling. I can feel it. At first, I tried to keep track of time, counting seconds, but eventually, numbers lost their meaning. Everything lost its meaning. Memories flashed through my mind like fragments of a broken mirror. My wife's face, the taste of beer, the numbers on the ticket. They haunt me. 9, 11, 25, 29, 35, 36, 45, 87. I'm not a time traveler. I'm not. But they don't care. Once you win the Eterna jackpot, you're guilty. No trial, no appeal, no mercy. I'm writing this now from the last flicker of sanity I have left. I don't know how I'm doing it. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. Maybe I'm writing to myself, trying to remind myself that I once existed. I can feel my mind slipping away. I see things that aren't there, shadows, faces, whispers, or maybe they are there. Maybe this is what the void does to you. Please, if you're reading this, believe me. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a time traveler. I just bought a fucking lottery ticket. Story. I chose the blue pill. My early 20s were some of the worst years of my life. At the time I was working a job with no future, had little to no social skills, and my time was very much wasted every day. This added up to a heap of depression, followed by very dark thoughts. Still, I was keeping myself going from the droplets of gratification that came from gaming, watching movies, and mindlessly browsing the internet, which kept me going for a while. But I never felt complete whenever there was quiet time in between. This is when I finally admitted to myself I needed help. At first I didn't know where to start. I had an irrational disliking to finding some public help group. I don't know why. I think at the time I still had that special snowflake vibe, that I felt my problems were more unique and too different for a cookie-cutter help group to solve. With this in mind, I took to the internet and blazed through until I started hitting the back pages of the search engine, looking for a hidden gem. My eyes were glazed over, skimming all the titles until one shook me from my catatonic state. Do you feel like everything is hopeless? Do you feel like the drones around you can't help you? Do you need a way out that's different? Click here to find out more. In my mind I immediately answered yes to all three. Those questions perfectly hit the nail on the head describing how I felt. Before long I was given a number to call to arrange a home visit. In the call I told them of all of my problems and how I felt, adding the caveat that I felt too different for any ordinary service to help. They seemed to be interested in my case and gave me a date for a visit a week on Friday. The time couldn't come any faster. I found myself practically counting the time away for that home visit. This was it, I thought to myself. This was what was going to be the beginning to the rest of my life. Friday rolled around, and I made sure I was doing nothing. I didn't start any games. I cleared up a spot on my otherwise messy house for us to talk. I even laid out some snacks. When the guy showed up, he wasn't what I was expecting at all. He was a very serious-looking man, in an all-black suit and tie, carrying a very formal briefcase. He looked like he should be bodyguarding someone of importance, not messing around with a slob like me. I offered him food and drinks numerous times throughout the appointment. However, he denied each time. He was just here for business. And he was serious. The speech he gave me was astounding. He rattled on about how I was the driving force for everything that's happened in my life. That all the bad that's happened to me was either directly or indirectly due to decisions I've made throughout my life. That all my decisions has led to this point, and how my future decisions will either pull me out or keep me going on this downward path. I was taken aback by how mind-blowing this all was to hear. And it was all true. I often felt like a mess. Yet I kept my house messy, which reinforced that ideal. I felt horrible when wasting time. Yet I purposely chose to waste the free time I had. I was always tired. Yet I chose to stay up all night and barely get any sleep before work. I really was the primary reason for everything wrong in my life. This was all perfect, and everything I needed, until the last point. He started to go on about one last decision I had to make. This is when he pulled out his briefcase, something which he hadn't drawn attention to at any point prior. He opened it on my just about cleared coffee table and turned it around. In the case were 2 pills, each on a soft bed. They almost glowed in the light with their glossy opaque coat. I stared at them. One was the most intense warm red I'd seen in person before. The other was a cool, chilling blue. I stared at them in disbelief, furrowing my brow in anticipation of what this was all about. I had already half figured it out in my head. I mean, who hasn't seen The Matrix? I was more just curious about the direction he was going to take this. Your life is a series of decisions. Decisions which has lead you to this one key moment. Will you take the blue pill? See your life carry on as it is? Or will you take the red pill and grasp the opportunity to end that cycle? He said all this with a straight face, so I reciprocated by taking it seriously, putting on a concentrating look while I eyed each option. My mind first came to the thought of the red pill. I mean, it sounds like the correct decision, right? This whole session was about making decisions to forward my life, and to stop choosing to be stagnant. But then reality kicked in. If there's something I've learned from failed diets and life-changing schemes, it's that there is no fast fix in life. If you want to lose weight, you have to work hard with diet and exercise. If you want to get rich, you can't just magic opportunities. You have to be proactive, and I figured that this was the moral of the session. I'll take the blue pill, I retorted. This was the first time I saw him react, and his serious guise was briefly dropped when he took in what I said. Are you sure? I've sat here telling you that to take control of your life. You have to make proactive decisions, he said, trying to sound persuasive. However, no matter how persuasive he was, I had it all figured out in my head. No, I'll take the blue pill. I know I have to make good decisions from now on, which I will do, but I also know that there are no magic fixes in life. Right now I'm making the first big decision of my new life. I'm choosing to take the hard way so I can grow. At first he scowled a bit, but then he smirked, and left me one last remark. Okay, you have made your decision. He handed me the blue pill as he carried on. However, I will leave you the red pill. If you ever feel like you need an escape, this is always an option. And with that, he left. I took the blue pill, and swallowed it with the dregs of coffee I had left. Smiled, and had a new outlook in life. From here, everything went uphill. I started by identifying issues in my life. I had all the common things you can think of. I was terrible in social situations, especially around women. I put in about 40% effort at work. At most, I lived a messy life, and ate terribly. I would stay up all night, and be slowed down for the entire day after as consequence. At first I went overboard. I forced myself into a healthy diet. To my body's protests, burnt myself out on my work, leaving me with a new kind of exhaustion. I made a fool of myself in front of others. This sent me spiraling back to square one, and in a way, made me feel worse than before. A new rock bottom. However, no matter how many times I hit this point, I would look at the red pill. This would make me call back the meeting, and bring back the emotional overflow which inspired this new journey of mine. I would remember my convictions, get up, and try again. After researching some helpful tips online, I found an interesting Japanese philosophy called Kaizen. It's the principle of changing so little in your life that you barely notice it. This helped a lot, as what always sent me back was my psyche getting too shocked from sudden change in status quo, and reverting back to my toxic default. I started very small. I swapped out a few unhealthy eating habits for a few good ones. I did the dishes whenever I used them, and I started simply taking notes at work. Once all this became second nature, I added to it. I started saying, "Hello," and "Have a nice day," to cashiers whenever I shopped. I cleaned a different room every week. Rather than trying to tackle the whole house, I started seeking small tasks to do at work. And you know what? People took notice. Coworkers suddenly had an interest in me. I was striking up conversation with various staff at shops, and I was starting to be praised for my efforts at work. All this led to an amazing rush of dopamine each time, and my positivity ramped up. I was now making friends. I was now being approached for conversation, rather than being forced to for work. I was even getting a bit of attention from curious ladies. The red pill, once a symbol of my lowest low, was now a symbol of how far I'd came. I kept it in a little clear box on my bedside cabinet, and told anyone who was interested of its story. This is not to say I never almost caved in. Failed dates, poor performance at work, mess piling up in my home. All of these would start to pull me back to my low. And each time, I'd eye the red pill. Curiosity growing of what it did. Temptation clawing at me for its promise of an easy fix. However, I'd use these feelings to remind myself of its message. The message of the thankless stranger who blessed me with this motivation all those years ago. That last thought hit me one day. I never thanked him. This was something I wanted to amend, now that I was flying through life. First I tried looking up the site. However, the link was dead. A common thing for most old independent websites due to the rise in presence of a more central social media-centric nature of the internet. I dug out my old phone, and tried calling the number I was given all those years ago. However, the number was seemingly not in use anymore. I had all but given up. The last thing to try was to start searching Google to find if it rebranded itself elsewhere, or see if I could find traces of it in the back pages somewhere. The latter seemingly an ironic way to find it, if that worked, but this would never be the case. As I searched, the first few links were to major headlines on news sites. My heart sank as I clicked one of them. The article went into detail about the group that ran the service, how they were fanatics dedicated to mass murder, and how they had persuaded many people in similar situations as me to commit suicide. At first I thought it might have been a different group under the same name. An easy alibi, as things like that have happened before. I made every excuse under the sun to deny their involvement, until I saw how they did it. First, they would find people who were in a low point of their life. Then they would offer them a choice. A blue pill, which was a simple placebo, or a red pill, which was filled with a lethal dose of cyanide, which if ingested, would result in a person's death within minutes. My stomach sank reading this. It went on to say there were no survivors, that everyone involved were either arrested, or found dead on scene, having taken one of the red pills themselves. This was contradictory, as I am living proof that there was a survivor. Not that they could ever find out, since they never kept a strong paper trail. I was in shock. Everything I had based my life around was, in a way, a lie. They weren't a help group. They were a bunch of mugs, lusting for murder. A murder cult which took advantage of people in a dark point of their lives. A concept that helped push me to where I am today. I had to take a break from my computer. So I went to my room to sit on my bed and look at the red pill. My prized possession, now a symbol of death. But that's when I had my epiphany. The red pill had always represented the easy way out. An option that was always there, yet one that never truly fixed any problems. It was as it always represented suicide, a message which they believed was the perfect solution. However, to me, it's a misguided message. Suicide is always an option. However, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. The blue pill represented nothing. The choice to have no magic fix intervene in your problems, but the choice to take them on yourself. A message which was not lost on me. In the end, I made the decision to stop thinking about whether they really were some sick, twisted help group with a good message, or a bunch of savages. Because to me, in a way, it didn't matter. What they did for me was the best thing that ever happened. And the message, though now more morbid, had never really changed. To make sure it couldn't hurt anyone, I took the red pill out of its easily opened box, and put it in a sealed, clear frame, and hung it on the wall. I still tell the story of what it means. However, I always leave out the last part of its true origin. Mysteries are everywhere, and some may be closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mystery. See you in the next story.